Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Significantly, the Prime Minister is also going to be meeting British industrialists, including representatives of the Japanese-owned car firms today. With me is our political editor, Faisal Islam, and an interesting clash, if you like, of engagements in the Prime Minister's diary.
Yeah, kind of like Brexit is a sort of glacier moving towards a snail, I think, but eventually some of the crunch decisions have to be made. We thought that that would be because of the Cabinet meeting. The Cabinet meeting meant that the Cabinet had to be prepared with some of the numbers, but I think the significance of these assessments, there were two sets of numbers, as you said. In a way, the ones that were more interesting but kind of slightly more complicated were these things about non-tariff barriers. These are the barriers that could exist. Currently, we have totally frictionless trade with our colleagues in Europe, our biggest market. So the question is, what type of friction will there be? About a year and a half ago, the PM would refer to, I want frictionless trade. That then changed subtly, but importantly, to as frictionless as possible. So the question is, how much, if at all, will trade be interfered with? And the answer to that from Brexiters is, well, there's no interest from the European side, so it'll be nothing. The fact is that there are just certain legal requirements of trading relationships, which means that there will be some sand in the wheels, things called rules of origin, regulatory standards, all that sort of stuff. And those were the figures that I think were really important. Now, 8 to 16%, 8 to 17%, 13% on cars, and they say to me that the government internally recognises that there will be some friction. The question is, will that friction balance out from the free trade deals that are done eventually?
And these figures, just to be clarified, where are they from?
So they're from the government officials' internal assessment. Number 10 say that this is preliminary. They say they haven't been signed off by ministers, although I don't know why they should be signed off by ministers if they're independent analyses. But they also say they don't include the end state that the government is looking for. They inform the Cabinet position. I think many Cabinet ministers will just ignore them. Others will say, hang on, if these are even half true, can we really do this in the way that you want to? And I think what's really interesting is that this very moment, just an hour or so after the Cabinet meeting finishes, you will have the Japanese executives turn up at Downing Street to meet the Prime Minister and some of the same Cabinet ministers. Kind of think it would be more interesting to merge both meetings.
Now, what are they saying?
Well, they sent a memo right at the start of the Brexit process, which was quite intriguing. It was not a very Japanese thing to do, to intrude on others' kind of internal politics. But they say that they argue we weren't intruding. We're merely pointing out the impact of, for example, leaving the customs union, leaving the single market in a certain way, on our manufacturers. And in the Japanese mindset, industrial mindset, promises that were made 30, 40 years ago are promises that stand in the long-term thinking of that nation. And it sounds absurd to say this, but Margaret Thatcher kind of literally promised the chairman of Nissan that it was highly unlikely that the United Kingdom would ever leave the EEC. Now, does that promise still stand? Probably not. Just the idea that factories that they consider to be European factories that happen to be sited in the UK, that they should have full and unfettered access to the EU, does that still stand? I'm pretty sure that that's the message they'll give very strongly.
But briefly, both these leaked documents shown to MPs and the Japanese car manufacturers are saying that the consequence of Brexit in the short term will be negative economically, is that right?
Well, I think they're not trying to stop Brexit, the foreign investors. I think they're just trying to point out that there are necessary consequences, and they get quite legal and technical to the trading arrangements if you leave the customs union in the single market. In all of that, and just remember this one last thing, the positions that we're hearing from the government right now, they're the starting negotiating position. What comes out of the wash of the negotiation, what is actually a red line here, that is what is really important.
OK, Faisal, thank you very much indeed. So is Brexit worth the possibility of widespread economic damage? Joining me are the Labour MP and champion of soft Brexit, Chuka Umunna, and the Conservative MP and Leave supporter, Crispin Blunt. Welcome to you both. I mean, Crispin Blunt, are we now approaching the point where we're saying, look, British people have voted for this, it is the right thing to do in the long term, even if there's short-term pain?
Well, I think that's the case. The United Kingdom's a vast organisation. It's making a big strategic change of direction, leaving the European Union and it's going for what's called global Britain in the Parliament.
Foot, frankly.
Well, the decision has been made, and all of these arguments were thrashed out in the referendum campaign. All the warnings were made by the Remain side. There will be an instant recession, emergency budget, and all the rest as a consequence.
Well, no, but this is different. I mean, this is
it's not different. They were pointing out that there would be economic costs for a decision to leave the European Union.
Yeah.
Now, they expected that those costs would immediately crystallise around a recession, emergency budget, growth in unemployment. None of that has happened. Now, I would accept as a leaver, as one would accept for any organisation making a big strategic change of direction, likely to be upfront costs. If you were going to roll the relationship forward with the European Union in the decades to come, the big problem for the United Kingdom is that we lack the emotional commitment to it. It's why we weren't in the euro. It's why we weren't in half the Justice and Home Affairs measures. It's why we weren't in Schengen. And we were going to be in a qualified minority in the Council of Ministers for the years and decades to come, and they would be voting the interests of the euro countries. Of course they would be. And so if you were trying to look forward, and these numbers are rolling out what the position on economic growth will be in decades to come, my view is actually there is a better opportunity outside the European Union than half in, half out, which was our position.
Say, Chuka Umunna, a lot of reasons not to change our mind.
Well, I think we should think again about this. I don't want to see Brexit. I've been very clear about this. A few things in response to what Crispin was saying. First of all, let's deal with the economic data that we're seeing now. 3% inflation, which means for your viewers, basic household items, bread, cereal, eggs, you name it, cost more when their wages have been contracting.
We were told emergency budget.
Yes, and I was going to come on to that. Secondly, the reason actually we didn't see the downturn that was expected was because of the tranche of emergency measures, the Bank of England reducing the base rate, putting in place the funding system for banks to make sure that the financial system didn't collapse. The measures that were put in place in August 2016 stopped that collapse that we thought was going to happen. And just two things, actually picking up on what Faisal was saying, the non-tariff barriers, all this technical jargon, why that's relevant is because actually the tariff barriers people talk about tend to apply to traded goods, tangible goods you buy in the shops. But actually, 80% of our economy is services, and that's where these non-tariff barriers are important.
Give us an example. What is a non-tariff barrier?
Well, for example, look, I practiced as a lawyer for the best part of a decade before I became an MP. There's a set of regulations that apply to the way legal services are provided, for example. As part of a single market, when you're providing services, there's a kind of framework of services. And then the customs union in particular, you tend to be looking at traded goods. Now, another thing that Crispin said is all these things that you were told haven't come to pass, which I dispute. But one thing that we were told and that people campaigning to Remain were saying is if you vote to leave the European Union and we come out of the customs union, that is going to present severe challenges for the Northern Ireland settlement. And everyone was like, oh, John Major and Tony Blair talking about this. Project Fear, but it's a reality now, and everybody wants to avoid having a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic. But the only way to avoid that, is by staying in the customs union. And in fact, the head of the police service in Northern Ireland has said he does not want to see an infrastructure. Well, it's true. It's a fact.
It's not correct. No, it is not correct.
Yes, it is.
The arrangements,
we haven't got an answer yet
the arrangements we come to between the
the
United Kingdom and the European Union, assuming that they are representing the Republic of Ireland in this, around the Northern Irish border, are entirely the arrangements that we will decide shouldn't agree on. And there should be solution. And if the objective is to make sure there is no hard border, it is within the wit of the negotiators on both sides to make sure there is not a hard border.
How?
And a hard border, in your terms, is actually going to mean a physical border. I presume is what you're saying.
It's not what I'm saying, it's what everybody's saying. Your government's saying this.
But you already have a border. You already have a fiscal border because there's a different currency.
As a Brexiteer, and I don't know, but I assume someone who supports leaving the single market and leaving the customs union, it's you, it's not them, it's you who's saying there's going to need to be a border because you want to define yourself as different from the European Union, including the Irish Republic.
If the Republic of Ireland and the European Union are determined to have a hard border.
Well, hang on. No.
We're the ones who are determined. We're saying we don't want it.
Exactly, we don't want it. And so we are prepared to negotiate whatever is required to make sure that in practice there is no hard physical border.
But how?
And all the arrangements,
if you're out of the customs union,
the arrangements, special arrangements you would need to put in place on traders across the border, giving pre-notice, or if they.
I mean, it has to be said. There's an attempt on Brexit Central to say how you'd run the border. And, I mean, it is laughably complex and makes a series of assumptions. I mean, the truth is that people have not come up with an answer.
And if there are reasonable people on both sides of the negotiations determined to make it work so that you don't have to have a hard border, I, for the life of me, cannot see why you would need
tell us
a hard
what it is.
border.
How do you avoid having a hard border without us being part of the customs union? You have no answer. Adam has just asked you this question 3 or 4 times and you haven't got an answer.
Yes, but what you're imagining is a hard border are customs post, physical barriers between...
But if you're out of the customs union, it's a necessity.
Well, then you have arrangements for people to be able to move things over the border, trade over the border.
That's a hard border. You are describing a hard border.
There is no physical border between the north and the south.
There is still an underlying problem.
But there is then, you can have a trade border in the same way as we have a fiscal border, we have a fiscal border now.
Your position is, as you say, 2 ex-Prime Ministers, John Major and Tony Blair, flagged this up. As you say, it was flagged up by Project Fear what the economic consequences were going to be. All that took place during the campaign, and yet a majority still decided that they were going to vote for Brexit. So doesn't that mean that the only thing in UNRWA that any government can do is deliver on that?
Well, the first thing is, I definitely accept that in 2016 a majority of people who participated in that referendum voted for us to leave the European Union. That was the question on the ballot paper. However, what wasn't put to people is how we leave the European Union. That was not put to people. It was, you could argue, put to people that we should leave the customs union and the single market in June 2017 in the general election.
And control our borders.
And all the rest of it. And the Prime Minister lost her majority. So I'm certainly not going to pretend there is a consensus in our country, but I do believe that if Brexit in the form that it was sold to the British people, with the £350 million extra per week to the NHS, the exact same economic benefits we were promised we would have outside of the European Union as we enjoy in it, if the car isn't what you thought it was when you bought it, I don't think you should be forced to buy it at the end of the process. And there's no legal or political reason why that must happen. And if the people, in the end, get the final say on this entire issue, how do you thwart the will of the people if they're the ones, in the end, who are going to determine our destiny? Why should it be done by an elite sitting over there in the House of Commons when the people started the process off in the first instance?
The people were asked to make a straightforward decision. Are we going to stay in the European Union or are we going to leave it? All the downfalls of leaving were made clear in the referendum campaign. And indeed, you can hardly claim that they weren't warned it was going to be utterly dreadful by the Remain side.
So the sale agreement's been done, we buy it even if it is an old banger.
Well, it won't be an old banger because you can't, because you've got the opportunity. Look,
where's the
for goodness sake,
£39 billion for the United. Who talked about £39 billion
for the United Kingdom? Membership of the European Union or pursuing global Britain is cruelly, it's a 50-50 choice.
It's not a choice, it's a false choice. You can have both.
I'm afraid
it's a totally false choice.
Thank you very much. We will revisit this one, but we are going to have to leave it there. You are watching All Out Politics.